Welcome to our mini module to support you in reducing workload. I can't say I have all the answers, but hopefully you will be able to think about some of the small things which might help you. Our aims for today are to identify and address issues facing teaching staff around remote learning situations and to support staff in reducing their workload. Education Scotland and the COVID-19 Education Recovery Group have given guidance and advice in developing a shared understanding and expectations of what remote learning means for schools. As teachers, we are being asked to apply this in our own setting and use it as a basis for professional engagement and development. Each school now has a policy for remote learning which teachers and the school community can refer to for further guidance specific to their context to ensure there is quality provision across the breadth of the curriculum. Since the first lockdown, we have learned to adapt our teaching methods and respond to new and changing circumstances and should be proud of our efforts. But nevertheless, we will have faced obstacles and challenges along the way. This training today is to help you to identify and address any issues that you may face when planning, delivering and managing remote learning while trying to maintain our curriculum framework and keeping a focus on learners developing their skills in independent learning. This is a huge ask and has been a big learning curve for us all, so we hope to give some advice and tips in helping you to reduce and manage your workload. Under normal circumstances, we would be able to get our voice on the table and have a good discussion about any of the issues that we might be facing while delivering remote learning and how we are trying to ensure that work-life balance. You will have different challenges depending on your confidence level, your remit, your setting, your own situation. You're going to pause the video shortly to take time to reflect on and note down one or two of the issues that you're having to deal with at the moment. How are you managing to balance your work life and your personal life? What might be getting in the way of balancing these? When you come back, we'll be able to think about some of the ideas that might make life a little bit easier. We can have a think about time management, the types of tasks you might be offering, whether that be independent, recorded lessons or live lessons, the use of the resources that you're having to make, and of course assessment and feedback. So pause the video now while you do that and join us again when you're ready. The first thing we're going to think about is time management. Time management is crucial for teachers and even more so now in this remote learning context. It will help us balance long-term goals, immediate needs such as lesson planning, live lessons, check-ins and marking and feedback, and getting through that ever-growing to-do list. So, how do you organise your day or your week? Do you make a list? This can actually save you a lot of time. Writing down the tasks you need to do each day and organising them based on priorities. Put the most important tasks at the top and tackle them first. If there are tasks you don't manage, add them to the next day's list. Try to be consistent. You could maybe have a go at using a Kanban board like the one on the slide. You could add post-it notes to each of the headings, things that you need to do, things that you are currently doing, and of course when you've finished them, putting them in the done column. Adding post-it notes and moving them along as you do each task can be very satisfying, but of course don't beat yourself up about not finishing a task. You can only do so much, and there's always tomorrow. Are you using your non-class contact time efficiently? Try to make this your dedicated time for planning. Of course, things change and you might need to edit and adapt along the way, but try to get the bulk of it done. Some schools are having to plan about 2 weeks in advance, which can be really useful as long as you know your pupils and where they are in their learning. Perhaps thinking about including a pre-assessment ahead of what you're about to teach in the main learning will allow you to plan more effectively. Have you mapped out specific times to meet with pupils throughout your week? And is this a regular routine? If it is, this will help you and the pupils. It might take some planning and communication with your SLT to ensure each class has a dedicated time each day for online face-to-face interactions, so they're not overlapping with other classes, as pupils working from home might be sharing their IT devices. Maximising this time with your pupils is what's really crucial, and we'll be looking at that shortly. Different schools are communicating with parents in a variety of ways, and hopefully the bulk of communication is being dealt with by your senior leadership team. But if it's not, don't be afraid to ask for their help and advice. If you're having to deal with communication from parents during the time that you have with your pupils, it can be very frustrating. So making it clear when you're actually going to be available for them, when you'll be responding to their emails, etc., will cut down on the amount of distractions that you might face on a daily basis. I would imagine that most of the communication from parents will be around advice on how to support their child, and parents are more likely to feel more able to support home learning if they have a picture in their head around their role for remote learning. 100% of Inverclyde schools have reported that they've shared these expectations with their parents around their role. But remember, pedagogy has changed, and we can't assume they're in a position to help if they're not aware of how to go about this. Think about giving them advice if you've planned for something new. They might also need some general advice on when to call it a day and what to do if things aren't going well. There is a bank of parent videos on the numeracy section of the CMO spreadsheet which you might want to share or signpost them to. You might need to preempt this so that they can access them without having to approach you or the school. So maybe including a live link in your emails to them or in the children's class notebooks. The CMOs are currently working on a dedicated website just for parents, so we can support you in this too. But if there is something that you think the CMOs can help you with, then please do get in touch. And finally, for this slide, do you have a dedicated time for yourself? We have to look after our own mental health and well-being. Why don't you timetable in your coffee break and lunch? Plan some family time or me time, and don't be tempted to just do another hour. If you're not well rested, you will not be as effective as you normally are. There are only so many hours in a day, and they can't all be spent dealing with work. Let's have a think about planning the learning. Think about what would be happening if you were planning for a week of learning in the classroom, and think about the similarities in planning a week for remote learning. If you can keep the same format, it might make life a little bit easier. Having the same routine will help you plan for live lessons and know when pupils will be engaged in independent tasks so that you can free up some of your time to tackle something else on your to-do list. How do you set out your learning for the week? Do you use a timetable or maybe put it under different subject headings? This can be really useful for planning. And sharing a suggested timetable so that you can establish those routines, or a time scale even, so that children know when work should be completed, can be really beneficial for them. They know what to expect and how long they should be spending on each task. And maybe even thinking about putting some colour coding into your timetable so that they know when they're going to be able to contact you, or when they'll know when they're going to have some live lessons. We're also being asked to prioritise the learning, and although we aim to provide a curriculum which has breadth across all subject areas, remember the COVID Education Recovery Group reported the need to prioritise numeracy, literacy and health and wellbeing. Your senior leadership team will guide you on expectations for your own establishment. The tasks that you provide need to be manageable for the pupils to work on independently, but building our confidence to use our live and recorded sessions to model new concepts and scaffold the learning is really important. And if we do this more regularly, pupils will feel more confident and less likely to require your time out with what's been scheduled, therefore helping reduce your workload. Remember, we can't expect to stick to it, and we can't think about those time constraints when we're teaching, but you can consider the needs of your class and the groups within it. We do need to factor in an element of flexibility to suit our families, but maybe by setting the times each week for the quality live time is a good compromise. So we're being asked to plan for a balance of live, recorded and independent work for learners to engage with. The types of tasks we set are varied and wide, from reading, doing, creating, playing, problem solving, investigating, practical activities and research tasks, maybe some project work or being involved in discussion with people. Some of these often, but don't necessarily require technology. We don't want or expect pupils to be engaged in online learning for the entirety of the school day, but neither do we want to use most of our time marking and providing feedback. By incorporating fun and motivating activities for pupils to do practically, actively, and outside, we can reduce our workload by having less marking to do, possibly including an element of personalisation and choice. We need to be clever about knowing what's out there already to support us so that we're not reinventing the wheel. Are we making use of lessons we have previously tried and tested and adapting where necessary to suit our current learners? Having a variety of tasks from digital to paper-based to outdoor learning or activities which will maximise engagement, yet at the same time move the learning forward. For example, you might have an open-ended start-up task each day, following that with a spelling activity, and during check-in, use that time to correct it together and get feedback from the pupils on how they got on. If you establish a different spelling activity for each different day, the pupils will get into the routine of knowing what kind of activity they have to do, and then all you need to do each week is to change the phoneme. Again, this consistent approach is what will help pupils and parents alike. And while providing tips and waggles to help parents may seem more time consuming, it can have the opposite effect. If parents have a better understanding of how to, they will be more able to carry out their role in supporting their children. As I said before, many of the approaches and strategies we now use is very different to how lots of our parents were taught when they were in school. And if you have a stage partner or a colleague in another school, could you support each other and take on different responsibilities and share them with each other, building on that existing good practice? The new Sharing Good Practice channel on the CMO training team could be an ideal platform for this, particularly if you don't have a stage partner within your own school. Independent tasks. Many of the tasks you set will be flexible to allow completion at a suitable time for the learner or their family circumstances. Therefore, the flipped learning approach is ideal. Pupils will work at a convenient time to read, research, or complete tasks ahead of planned follow-up sessions with you. Using strategies and activities which pupils are comfortable and familiar with from the traditional classroom will prove most beneficial. Sharing learning maps and grids and charts specifying the content to be learned each week will support this approach. Of course, not all independent tasks need to be paper-based or written. Opportunities to extend the learning. Think about giving low floor and high ceiling tasks. These are great for this. There's lots of other really useful ideas on Scotland Learns. Flipping the learning and asking pupils to prepare reading numeracy tasks before live lessons will give you more time to spend on teaching, modelling and scaffolding learning. Using task maps for follow-up reading work can offer pupils an element of choice in the order that they complete the tasks, if you think a bit about Anne Neil's reflective reading process. Next, we want to think about setting out clearly the expectations that we have and try to anticipate any problems that might come up. So you need to think carefully about your learning so that you're able to give some guidance on the things that might prove to be tricky, and that might reduce the amount of pupils who are requiring further support. Incorporating time to spend on following up independent tasks will not only decrease your marking time, but it could prove opportunities for discussion, which will allow you to find out who's making progress or detect any issues. And remember to celebrate their mistakes. You can then go over some new content in a new way to aid understanding and give feedback and assess next steps in learning. What about stuck strategies? We may be used to using these in the class, but do we remind children of what to do when they're in a learning pit at home? Again, you might want to stop here, pause the video for a short while, and just note down any of the ideas you might have for stuck strategies. Providing a waggle for them to compare against is a really useful tool to use. And once a set of stuck strategies are shared, they can be used and referred to over and over again. Are there any resources provided in home learning tasks to support them? Do we remind them to stay calm? Maybe to take a brain break? Just to maybe reread the question? Using a helpful tool? And if they're really stuck, just to have the confidence to skip that problem so that it can be dealt with at another time or speak to you. They might be able to phone a friend, ask an adult. If there's a video linked to what they've been learning, could they go back and watch that first? And then if they indicate which problem they have real difficulty with, then maybe when you're having a live learning session, then they could speak to you about that face to face. What about personalisation and choice? Could you factor in an element of this? Maybe an open-ended project over an extended period of time, which is of a particular interest to them. They could have a set of key elements to include depending on their age and stage, and can decide how they will present it when it's completed. For example, it might be a poster talk upon return to school. This is a really great way to extend learning skills for many pupils. So you might say, choose a famous person or a country or an animal, a hobby or a historical event to research, and then prepare something to share with the class. We do have to think about resources, and we need to think about how much time that we spend producing, copying, collating packs. Are you making use of the resources which pupils can use over and over again? If they're needing 100 square, are you copying that every single week? Or are you asking them, make sure you keep a hold of this? To save time, think about that balance again of practical and paper-based so that you're not sending out too much. And you also had to think about what resources pupils might have at home. And if they don't have that resource, can you maybe suggest an alternative? Is there a way they could make resources as a practical activity in preparation for a task to save you time in searching and photocopying? But of course, you'll know your own families and how appropriate this might be. Live lessons. This is probably the one that most people might want to, a little bit of advice around. You will know your learners best and be guided by your senior leadership team and your remote learning policy around how many live lessons you're expected to offer on a daily or weekly basis. You might be doing daily registrations to track engagement, but that doesn't really give us the evidence of engagement in undertaking the assignments that were given to kids. You'll have to think about whether the live sessions that you are actually providing are for the whole class or for just a small group. And more importantly, you need to consider the content of the sessions and if it actually supports moving the learning forward. So some of your sessions might be quite informal, but there might need to be more of an element of the formal coming into. And again, you'll know what there is more need for. And are there opportunities throughout the week for both of these? Are there opportunities for engagement with other pupils to support learning as well as informal engagement? 78% of primary schools feel that this is happening. So what can live learning actually look like? Because it can be interpreted in many ways. Again, you can actually pause the video here if you want to and note down some of your ideas or examples that you've currently been using so that you can reflect on them and maybe even add to them as we go through this slide. So it might be that a teacher is discussing with the pupils the learning that's already taken place previously. Maybe they've watched a video and they're going to talk about what they've learned through it, or maybe talk about what they have been reading or another numeracy related task. Maybe it's about the teacher and the pupils talking about how they can support each other in well-being, so really just that check-in. Maybe the live session could actually be watching a video together and talking about it in real time, so that you can, again, use those pause points and actually focus in on different pupils within your class. The teacher and pupils might be assessing work which has already been carried out independently and giving a bit of feedback on this, and that's a good opportunity to reinforce learning for everyone. And most importantly, it might be that a teacher's delivering new content, new learning, and that could be to the whole class, but likewise it could be for just a small group. So there needs to be opportunities for pupils to work together on tasks, or maybe think about using it as family learning, if possible, sharing their experiences with their families. And live learning can be a mixture of some of these things, and what's important is that the experiences that we give make the learning progress. So just as an example, you could maybe start off your week with a whole class, and then after you've done your check-in or your routine, you might have a rotational basis of keeping a group of learners for longer and the others leave to continue with their independent tasks. Making good use of your time online with pupils is what you're aiming for if you want to reduce your workload. It might be that you'll start off the week with a fun game or a check-in chat, followed by setting the scene for the week ahead, sharing some of the content and expectations for the week, signposting the pupils to their assignments, age dependent of course there. And just as in class, when new concepts are introduced, they need to be taught. We need to factor in some time to model and think aloud and look at what a good one looks like and even what a good one doesn't look like, and have opportunities for the pupils to ask questions ahead of when they're going to complete a task. Maybe midweek you could check in, and it could be an optional session around dealing with any issues that have arisen so that they can be addressed and pupils are ready to continue. Because sometimes if you wait to the end of the week to do that, it might be too late and then the learning hasn't progressed as you anticipated. Near the end of the week, you could incorporate a plenary type session for sharing what has been learned. And having a focus group each week to report back will allow you to manage this effectively without feeling you have to hear from every learner in this way every week. And can we incorporate elements of formal and informal interactions into our daily registration and check-ins? Maybe we could involve the children in creating success criteria as we would in the classroom. Can we reduce the amount of time marking and assessing by using some AFL techniques at this time? We will think about different ways that we can feedback and assess later on. But remote learning is not about the tech, it's about the teach. So recorded lessons. There is a wealth of recorded content which is readily available from a variety of sources like West OS or Oak National Academy or BBC Bitesize. These are particularly useful as they can be accessed on the CMO training team in the files section on the general channel, but that spreadsheet that has all the videos on it. This was created to save you time searching and browsing the net, and they've been collated according to each curriculum for excellence level and the pathway and organiser. And we've got those for literacy and numeracy at the moment. So you just maybe want to have a think, have you actually accessed that resource? Do other people around you have access to it, or is this new to you? So you might want to go and have a wee look at that, because it really will help to reduce your workload if you're spending a lot of time looking to see what's out there. The CMO's also created live video content for literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing, and these are in the West to West ClickView channel, and they can be used. It's a series of 4 up to 6 lessons that can be used over time. And CMOs are also currently creating a resource finder to further support you in reducing your workload. Education Scotland's national e-learning offer is another really useful place to look for content and support. Before using any of the readily available content, you might want to prepare the pupils. And one way to do this is to assess their prior learning. And some of the websites incorporate this into their lessons, as well as providing some follow-up tasks. But if they don't, you might want to think about maybe trying to make one that's suitable. If recorded content is long, you might want to suggest that it's viewed in 2 sections, and make sure that you indicate this to parents, that it's okay to do that if their child is not engaged. Because after all, children really do prefer to be taught by their own teacher in an ideal world. Having recorded content is particularly useful for pupils to revisit as often as they need to. Recorded lessons can be very effective if they're also used as part of your live lesson. So you could be sharing the actual video and using the pause points that you share the content, and it'll let you assess and act upon the learning instantly, and it'll allow you to give feedback. Using the recorded content in this way will also let you build your own confidence, maybe around creating your own recorded content. Whether you are using recorded lessons or delivering your own live content, your planned follow-up tasks can be related to allow pupils to work at their own pace and level. And you can differentiate the same task for groups rather than having completely different lessons for different groups to reduce your workload. Assessment and feedback. The why. We need to track and monitor progress as part of the learning, teaching and assessment cycle. We also want to ensure learners are aware of the progress they're making in their learning and what they need to do to improve if we want the learning to move forward. It's great that 100% of primary schools in Inverclyde have reported that they have plans in place to facilitate that ongoing dialogue about reflection and feedback with pupils and their families about their experiences of online learning. And when should it be taking place? Teachers who are finding their workload heavy are often spending much of their time marking and giving feedback. Consider, would it be worthwhile using your check-ins and live sessions to correct work together to save some of this time? And who? Is it always the teacher who's doing the assessing? Are there opportunities for you to say this is a self-assessment task or a task that could be assessed by a peer? Of course, some activities lend themselves more to one than another. How often are we required to assess? Could you use rotations for assessing pieces of work so that they get the chance to be assessed for different things throughout the week? And how are we actually assessing? There's lots of different ways, whether that be oral, written, on a scale of 1 to 10, and giving audio feedback. If we want to reduce the written feedback, then we need to move towards providing it orally face-to-face as we would in class, or using the self-assessment or the peer assessment. So we'll have a wee think about ways of eliciting the evidence of learning and ultimately getting and giving feedback during live lesson. And the 3 links there will let you go to little short videos as well that you might want to have a look at after it. So when we had the Digital Champions meeting just the other week, one of the teachers had said they had used their live lesson like a show me board, and they asked a question and asked their pupils to type in the answer, but they weren't allowed to press enter until they counted down. So you would ask a question, give them think time and time to type in the answer, and then you would count them down, 3, 2, 1, show me. And that's when they would hit the enter key, and it gives you that instant feedback of who got it right or who thought one thing over another, and then you can use that evidence that you've got to delve a little bit deeper. Maybe you could think about an exit path, the 2 things I've learned, so that you can find out, what's resonated the most with your pupils. Or maybe even have a picture up, a spot the mistake question or a which one doesn't belong, a two truths and a lie. These are all really great for eliciting evidence of what's been understood, and also asking them to create a question for their peers after a piece of work's finished. Why don't you create a problem like this? And then they could maybe even work on those together too. Using thumbs up and thumbs down while you're during a live lesson to show whether they agree with a statement or disagree with a statement, or if something's true or false when they're answering a question. And again, if you're asking them to check in with you about something that they found hard or something that they find easy, is a really good type of feedback that you can use for creating next steps. If you share the screen, as we've mentioned before in the live lessons, to watch a recorded lesson together, you can decide on the pause points to elicit information, to check for understanding, or to recap on some learning. And again, assessing pieces of work together rather than just always on you. So it might be that you're picking out some things to look at, and you don't need to name names, but you could look at things together. Giving them, again, during live lessons, giving them thinking time and then asking them to unmute and answer. If they're doing an independent task, maybe providing a checklist for them or a marking grid or the actual answers, not along with the assignment, but maybe later on in the week, and they can go back and check. And if they've got anything wrong, be allowed to resubmit. Or maybe providing an audio clip, which can be used on their class notebook if you're using those to give feedback on independent tasks. Microsoft Forms is another great way, and that can be used as either a pre-assessment tool a couple of weeks in advance to find out what pupils already know, and then you can spend some time planning an appropriate task rather than finding out further down the line if the task was actually too easy or hard for them. It can also be used as a post-assessment, obviously, to find out what has actually been learned, and I think Teach It has lots of similar things that you can use there. So we also think about, as I've said, having opportunities to draft and redraft work after feedback has been given. Older pupils might want to make a wee mind map of their learning, or give an audio learning summary, and they can record it for you to be heard. Older pupils might be encouraged to keep a learning log in their class notebook to be submitted outlining what's been going well for them and where they might need a bit more help, or what they need to do to actually improve and reflect against their learning intention success criteria. And maybe even encouraging the parents to be involved in this might reduce contact with you too. But what we have to remember that however we gather this evidence of learning, it really should be used to direct our next steps. Professional learning. Since first lockdown, teachers have been thrown in the deep end and expected to use IT skills, many of which are new to us. You can speak to your digital champion in your school, and they will be able to share some good practice around what's happening in the authority and offer advice and support with a particular issue if you have one. But we have to remember that we are accountable to keep up to date with our IT skills, and this has never been more evident than it is just now. Be more confident with IT skills and apps might reduce your workload, even though it might initially mean some time given to your professional learning in that area. Education Scotland have lots of advice and support for remote learning if you go to digilearn.scot. And again, Microsoft Teams, which we're using a lot of the time, have lots of modules that are readily available on YouTube. Networking can be really valuable too. This might be working with your colleagues in your own school or a contact from another school in the authority or out with. We're looking to create a network within the authority so that teachers can collaborate with colleagues who work at a similar stage. And at the minute, our focus will be on primary 4 to 7 firstly, since the primary 1 to 3s will be back at school. And using this platform, I'd hope to encourage collegiality across the authority, where teachers can share good practice. It would mean a buy-in from all staff to work well, so spread the word about that and hopefully we'll get people on board. It'd be great to kick this off with a virtual meeting for each stage to share our views and build a wee bit of momentum in sharing that good practice. I've already set up a sharing good practice channel on the CMO training team, and I'm trying to encourage staff, everyone to upload their examples in the folder most appropriate for their stage. If everyone came on board with this, we really would be helping each other. Our workload would definitely reduce. I'm not looking for perfect, just what works best. There might be one particular PowerPoint that you've shared with your class that went really, really well, or you've set a practical open-ended activity that your pupils were particularly engaged with. Or maybe you could add a link to the posts of something that you've used with your class that you found really beneficial. When we were on again the Digital Champions meeting the other day, we saw lots of great examples of sharing good practice in this ways from the virtual classrooms and thing links. And again, already on the Sharing Good Practice channel, I've put lots of posts there about the different content that might be available. So have a wee look and see if any of those might be of use to you. If this session had been live, obviously we would have had the opportunity to ask and answer any questions that you may have, but please feel free to get in touch with any of the CMO team if you do have any questions around reducing your workload or in any way that we can support you. I would ask you just now to either note down the bit.ly link, which will take you to our evaluation form for the session, or just, take a picture of the QR code and it will take you straight to the Microsoft forum. It will only take you 3 or 4 minutes to complete, and it really is crucial that we get that information about, what this training has offered you and what's been good about it and what we might need to change about it. So if you could do that, that would be great. After this, I've just got a couple of slides of the useful website that Education Scotland have provided that you might want to look at. So thanks very much for taking part today. And as I've said, please get in touch if you do require any support at all.